Emulating a teacher's approving nod in teaching material. My name is Tanks Transfeld. My pronouns are they, them. I'm a former teacher for chemistry and art. And now I teach embedded development and the Rust programming language at Ferris Systems. You can find me on Twitter. My handle is Mirabellensaft. Ferris Systems offers trainings in Rust, among them an introduction to embedded Rust, Rust on microcontrollers. When the pandemic started, we had to move our in-person trainings online, which changed the way we had to think about our trainings. I want to share our process of adapting teaching material to this new situation. I will talk to you about the role of the teacher or trainer, how remote training is different from in-person training, and what the changed new requirements for teaching material are and how to fulfill them. We have learners, students, who want to learn a certain subject. The teacher facilitates this process in the classical way of teaching. This facilitation is often focused on the teacher being the ultimate source of knowledge about the subject. The central position of the teacher blurs the fact that a teacher has done the job most effectively if learners don't need the teacher anymore. Before the pandemic, this is how our trainings were mostly organized. A trainer gives a lecture, and then students work on programming problems. When issues occurred, learners consulted the trainer. Knowledge can be gained from multiple sources besides the teacher. So let's look at how teachers facilitate learning besides providing that knowledge. They maintain eye contact, read the body language of their students to see how they are. They check on students' work by walking by and then give verbal or nonverbal feedback. They assist with technical problems, answer questions, give hints and problem-solving strategies, and provide further challenges if students are finished early or inspire further curiosity on the subject. So teachers are more focused on the learner's needs, not the subject. What changes when we move online and teach from our homes? There's no eye contact. Everyone looks into a camera or at eyes on the screen. Teachers can see students' faces at best, often not even that. Teachers can see if someone has trouble if they don't ask for help. Teachers can't walk by the students to check on their status. They need students' active verbal feedback all the time. Also, teachers need to focus even more on verbalizing their status. Communication becomes asymmetric because not everyone can see everyone else. Students ask questions in a chat, while trainers have an open mic all the time. The dynamic of the communication changes. And a huge part of that is that verbal communication increases because nonverbal communication is not possible, and there is no central channel to breakout rooms. So what are the requirements for teaching material? Replace the teacher as the ultimate source of knowledge. Consider the changed communication dynamic by reducing individual questions. Be inclusive for people who are deaf or hard of hearing. Be inclusive for blind people or people with low vision. Be inclusive to diverse technical backgrounds and skill levels. And enable students to follow the basic strain of the training with as little individual assistance as possible so teachers have more capacity for arising issues. So the key concepts to fulfill these requirements are providing all lecture content in writing and formulating tasks explicitly, include the expected outputs, results, and provide tiered aids, provide text descriptions of images, and provide illustrations of key concepts, and maintaining an updated troubleshooting page. To replace the teacher as ultimate source of knowledge, we wrote a walkthrough. This walkthrough guides through the setup process, contains programming problems, contains all lecture content in writing, and provides additional material and explanations. This is inclusive for deaf people and people who are hard of hearing, reduces individual questions because students can consult the document before asking questions, and the participants have reference material to take home. Explicit worded tasks. One of the hardest things in learning how to teach is wording tasks in a way that people understand immediately what you intend them to do. Spoiler, there will always be misunderstandings, but they can be minimized. So I will get a bit into detail about how wording of tasks can be improved. Because imprecisely worded tasks generate a lot of questions that can be avoided. Let's look at this example. The following command will flash the ELF file to your device. This is factually not wrong, but the sentence is not a call to action. It only gives information about what the following command will do if used, because the command will not do any action by itself. It just sits there, ready to be copied. This construct assumes the learner knows that flashing the microcontroller is the next step they need to take, and it expects them to know what to do with this command. A first improvement, add an imperative. Use the following command to flash the program to the device. This signals that the reader needs to do something. Depending on the context and previous experience of the user, this might be enough. But in general, verbs like use are often not very precise. Objects can be used in multiple ways, and when you word your tasks with use, you assume the learner knows how to use them, or how you want them to use them. Let's add more precision. Enter the following command into the terminal to flash the ELF file to the microcontroller. We substituted the verb use with enter. We also told the learner where to enter the command in the terminal, and we specified that the device we are talking about is the microcontroller. Depending on the context, this previous knowledge of the learners and how many similar tasks there were before, this level of precision might be too much. But I think this progression shows well how precision can be added by adding imperatives and by describing the behavior you want to see. The participants have entered a command. What's next? After asking a learner to take an action, include the output that is expected. Here we have another example. The example action we ask the user to take is connect the dongle to your computer. Put the dongle in bootloader mode by pressing its reset button. The expected output or result: when the dongle is in bootloader mode, its red LED will oscillate in intensity. The dongle will also appear as a USB CDC ACM device with vendor ID and a product ID. Why is it important to include terminal output or a description of what the microcontroller is doing? Your students don't know what the expected output is because a successful operation is not always obvious. This is especially important if you let the learner run into an error. This avoids that half of the participants ask the trainer, "Is this right?" This is the approving nod of the teacher that gave the talk its name. Providing the expected output will let the learners know instantly if their result is correct and give the trainer the time to focus on students who did not get the expected output. As a bonus, indicate if the learner's output is only similar to the example output you provide. Often type numbers are different for each device. How do we include diverse skill levels? A big part of our training is that students work on programming projects. When providing assignments to groups you don't work with on a regular basis, the background and the previous experience of the participants might be so diverse that with any given problem, some might not be able to solve it at all, while others will complete it in no time. Dealing with this in the classic way means communicating with the students a lot by giving hints and starting points to less experienced participants and providing additional challenges to the more experienced. Since most of this communication can be anticipated, we moved it to a walkthrough in the form of tiered aids. What are assignments with tiered aids? Well, basically, you choose a problem that is challenging to the more experienced learners, and you provide a set of aids that will guide the less experienced learners to the solution. The aids can be in a number of different formats. For example, you can provide crucial knowledge that your students might be missing. You can provide starting points like a code fragment or a template. You can ask questions that can put the learner into the right directions. You can give them references to relevant parts of the documentation. You can provide a step-by-step guide on how to reach the solution. You can provide pseudocode or a flow diagram. You can provide partial solutions because sometimes it's only the first step that is questionable and people can continue on their own after having completed the first step. And you can provide the solution as a last step. Because if somebody is not able to solve the problem by themselves, but have worked through all the provided aids and then looks at the solution through that lens, they have learned a lot more than if they just copied the solution or if they never knew what the solution was at all. We provide alternative text in our walkthrough. In our workshops, we show the microcontroller, but people who are blind cannot see that. So in the training, in the walkthrough, we provide additional text descriptions that does not rely on the ability to see the structures on the board. We also provide a graphic because sometimes video quality is very bad or as a reference material so people can find the structures we refer to, such as the USB ports. We also provide troubleshooting pages. They contain the description of the problem, the occurring error messages, and a guide on how to debug this. For example, if the dongle flash program is not working. This is the description following the error message, and then a guide on how to solve this problem. Tiered aids, troubleshooting pages, explicitly worded tasks, and expected outputs are all very nice, but how do you make sure you have everything that is relevant and that it works as intended? Debug your docs. Work through the material you have written yourself. Then let others work through the material, especially people with less experience. Work through the material on different operating systems and include your findings into your docs. Repeat this project. Repeat this process and repeat after the training. When all this information was included, we looked at a document of over 7,500 words, only for the beginner's course of 3.5 hours. This is quite a wall of text and very intimidating and overwhelming, and is especially hard to use for people with neurodivergences. We used 3 different strategies to avoid overwhelming people with too much text. We structured the content like a book. We visually marked different kinds of information and separated assignments from solving strategies. To structure our document, we used a tool. To structure and display the information like a book, we used Mdbook. Mdbook is a Rust tool. It is commonly used for learning materials in the Rust community. The most famous application is the Rustbook, which teaches the basics of the Rust programming language. This tool generates a static website with a menu from Markdown documents. It is a very minimalistic tool, and formatting is limited to what Markdown allows. Its strength is its simplicity. It's probably not known outside the Rust community, but although written in Rust, it doesn't require Rust knowledge, so you might want to check it out. This is an example of how it looks. The URL embeddedtrainings.fairsystems.com is our training material, and this is the first page. You see the menu on the left with chapters and subchapters, and the content on the right. We used emojis to visually mark different kinds of information. Emojis work well in Markdown, and they are readable by screen readers and provide a large number of icons. This way, learners can see in one glance which parts of the text are important for them right now. I can skip to action items if I was able to hear everything from the lecture. I can specifically skip to the next speech bubble emoji if I need an alternative description. I can see with the exclamation mark where I have to pay extra attention. I have the choice to omit additional explanations if I don't want a deeper understanding of something by omitting the magnification glass. To keep chapters as short as possible to minimize scrolling, stick to one topic per chapter. Use subchapters and separate assignments from solving strategies. Here are some things that you can take away from this talk. Reduce the need for verbal communication by providing explicitly worded tasks, provide expected results and problem-solving strategies. Be more inclusive by providing lecture content in written form, alternative media, tiered aids, and a clear document structure. Thank you for listening to my talk.
I really loved, I was so excited to see this topic because it's something that became really prevalent in my work. I teach a web development course, and I think as soon as we all had to go online, everyone was panicked. Everyone was like, how are we going to do this? What is it going to be like? Can we even keep up engagement? Da, da, da. And as you mentioned, turns out a lot of it was really translatable, or it was things that maybe it could even be optimized and be better online. So I want to spend a little bit of time diving into these misconceptions about teaching online. And I want to start with, I'm wondering, what do you think are maybe the biggest or some of the biggest misconceptions people have, and what is your response to that?
I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that basically I read it in form of a tweet, kind of a hot take from someone, that you can't teach people if you can't see them.
I almost mentioned this in the intro because I saw the same tweet.
So, I mean, this is, for one thing, there are blind teachers and they teach and they do this successfully. And I am very sure that we could learn a lot from blind teachers about that. And the other thing is, there have been correspondence courses forever. So there is a way to teach people without seeing them. And so what we have to take into consideration that we can't see people and that we have to change our habits about that. So, I mean, I rely a lot on seeing people. So like, I observe people, I see what they're doing, and that's how I know how to continue. And one thing I struggled with when delivering trainings was, if people don't tell me they're done, I don't know if they're done. Mm-hmm. And people have very different working speeds. And if I don't see people struggling, I need them telling me they're struggling. So one thing to help that was telling people, hey, please let me know when you're done. Post an emoji in the chat, or mm-hmm. when we have like small groups and everyone has an open channel, please tell me. Let me know. And I also, something, because people forget that, is I have to ask a lot, which is for someone like me who is relying a lot on visual feedback. I have to get used to asking these things.
Absolutely. I think we definitely had that misconception on my team where it was like, oh, if people aren't turning on their cameras, they're not engaged. And like, there's so many reasons that people wouldn't turn on their camera. One being, Wi-Fi connection. There's family. Yes. There's so many different reasons for it. I mean, so I love that point, really.
And also the thing is, I mean, we're teaching grown-ups, and I mean, with children, it might be a different thing. But we're teaching people that chose to be there in some way or another because they chose that profession or because they chose to be in that training.
Absolutely.
And why should people not be engaged in something they chose to be?
Right.
So it's just basically a malassumption about people wanting to learn things, is that they're not engaged if they're there, and we can see that.
Yeah, exactly. But then how do you mentioned, kind of creating these communication channels and really fostering that kind of, I would say, trust. I mean, you have to have the people be able to feel comfortable asking these questions or flagging you. Yes. When you have an issue. Do you have any tips for creating that kind of environment within your teaching setting, I guess?
I haven't done it too often, but one time it's basically people were in a mood where this happened by itself. People were very active and very vocal in the chat and helped each other, which is a thing that happens. And in a different setting, which was also a very smaller group, I asked people to tell me why they're there. What's an embedded Rust? And so this is one thing I I want to know about the people I'm working with, and I want to get to know them. And that's also a way to create that trust.
No, that
So
is
it's basically
great.
because they notice I care about them.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you mentioned in your talk a lot about these tiered aids. And
Yes.
we had one question about how do you provide those tiered aids? Do you use any sort of machine learning, or what kind of what tricks do you have?
No, not at all. It's basically if you when you solve a problem, you take certain steps either in your head, or you consult the documentation, or you access knowledge you have gained from a different experience.
Mm-hmm.
And what you do is you make your solution steps transparent, basically, and not necessarily by providing that knowledge, but also like tell the people to consider checking the documentation. And this is one thing to make tiered aids is be aware of your own process of solving things.
That's a great tip.
So, and be aware of what you learn, what your knowledge is that you needed to solve that. And then you can go on and provide that knowledge to others.
Yeah, great tip, really. And then going back into, the nitty gritty of tooling, do you have any suggestions for tooling that isn't based in Markdown? So something like Mdbook, but not Markdown.
We have also experimented with what it's called, ASCII Doctor,
Mm-hmm.
and but not in a book format like that. That does not exist. And since I'm not a tech writer in that sense, I don't have that much tooling experience.
No problem.
But that is definitely something that is also to be improved, because Markdown doesn't allow that much formatting.
Mm-hmm.
And I personally see a lot of room for improvement there to make things even easier to visually see.
Yeah, definitely. If anyone from the community has any suggestions for that, please throw them in the chat. I'm sure
Yes,
everyone
I'm
will benefit from
very
it.
curious about that.
Yes. And then I want to, before we end, this Q&A, I want to talk about, you talked so much about accessibility, and I love that. And I want to touch on I'm trying to think of a good way to word this, because I believe accessibility is important and deserves so much priority in the work that we do. But if you're someone who is maybe doing something solo, or is a little bit strapped for time or on a deadline, what kind of tips would you have for what types of accessibility practices to prioritize maybe in your teaching?
The one thing that turned out to be very helpful was actually providing everything in writing, because writing is accessible to screen readers, and people who can't hear can read that usually. And also writing everything out helps the teacher be more precise when talking, which is also very helpful for people. So yeah, that's probably the one thing I would prioritize, is actually having everything written out, not just in notes, but whole sentences, and as precise as possible. And yeah, put focus on that precision.
I think this is the perfect audience to be giving that suggestion to. I think most of us really love to have that writing, have something documented, it's solidified in time. So I think that's a really great tip. So I want to just say thank you so much for being here with us today. Where can people, get in touch with you if they have more questions?
You can reach me on the chat. And if there are enough people interested, I'm also happy to provide an unconference session, for example, on how to do tiered aids or so.
Amazing. So if you're interested in that, make sure to voice your opinions in the chat. So then it looks like some people are really excited about it. So you might be running an unconference session after all. But yeah, thank you so much for being here with us.
Yes, thank you.